Hi, let's get sewing. I have my arches here ready to stitch on my machine and some scissors so I can trim up the seam allowances as we go. For machine setup, I am using a Schmetz machine embroidery needle. It's just my preference for piecing. The Schmetz embroidery needle is a ballpoint and it's heat tempered. So as I'm sewing with it, it separates the fibers instead of splicing them as you sew. And for thread, I'm just using a cotton piecing thread that's a neutral color. As far as brand preferences, just have something that's a decent quality, Aurifil, DMC, maybe Metler, but I find that DMC and Aurifil are the best quality for cotton piecing threads. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to be working from the back side, and we will open up our fabric here so that we are going to be stitching right on this crease. Now sometimes if your crease is not as visible because of the color of fabric, you can even take a little pencil and just draw a line if you feel like you need a little extra guidance. Just draw a little pencil line there, it'll all wash out. And then start at the end of your crease. Line up your needle right down the center of the crease. And we're going to slowly stitch as we go down, especially because this is a little curvy. So we want to make sure on that curve we stay right on the crease line to maintain that curve and have it be accurate. So go ahead and get started. I'm using a 2 stitch length. That's pretty typical for me for piecing. And we'll go ahead and get started. So as you go, this is not speed racer piecing here because we want to make sure we stay right on that crease. But as you get better and practice, you'll be able to go a little faster. So here's where we can chain piece. See, I have that first one done. Just stick the second one right underneath the foot, lining up my crease with the needle, and then just keep on going. See how nice and fast that is? I can get the second one. Now, in between, you can go ahead and trim your seam allowance down to a nice 1/4 of an inch, give or take. You can, for these arches, because none of the seams overlap each other, you can wait till the end to go ahead and trim them as well. So just keep on going. Now, one thing that I have had happen at classes is somebody will put their fabric under their machine like this, with the bulk of fabric on one side and the other side of the fabric on the other, and stitch right on the crease. Well, stitching that way, you end up only stitching through one layer of fabric rather than both. So when you're stitching, just like with typical piecing, make sure your seam allowance, short side of the seam allowance is on one side, and then the bulk of your fabric is on the other. You might say, oh, this is so fun. Seeing if I had a whole bunch of them all ready to go, man, I would be cruising. This is great. Alright, just keep on going. So nice to have that crease. I don't have to worry about managing and keeping a 1/4 inch accurate, and no paper piecing, so I don't have to go back and forth between placing my fabric and trimming my fabric. Now this is Just so nice. I hope this opens up a lot of possibilities for you. Make sure on those pieces that have a slight curve that you maintain the curve and don't sew it off straight, because those are going to be an important element in the curve of your rings. Okay, last one, little curve. Make sure you pull out any bulky seam allowances away so you don't sew over it. Nice and slow around that curve. Put aside, gently put aside any fabric in the way of helping you make that curve. Okay. Then, once you have all of your seams stitched, you can go ahead and trim off your nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once all of those are done, you can press them to the side. I recommend pressing them to the same side that you originally pressed them. No need to fight the directionality of that. It's already used to going that one way. If you need to, because you want to press to the dark side, that's fine. So that one's done. Turn this one up. So you see, hope you seeing it done helps you understand more of why we make those seam allowances larger. It really helps when you're sewing to not have to have just this little tiny extra allowance to work with. Having that extra on the side really will help as a tool for your sewing. So these are all stitched and ready to be pressed, all nice and lovely. So we'll go ahead and press them, and then we'll be ready to put them into our millings. So when you have your arches all stitched out, you're going to go ahead and press them. As I was mentioning, you can press them in the direction that they were pressed originally. Give them a light press. I usually give a light press to the back first. Then flip it on over. And then press, gently press toward the direction that your seams are pressed to the side. We're not opening up seams here. Just press them nicely to the side. Get it nice and flat. Oh, doesn't that look good? Look how nice that is. It's all nice and ready to be assembled. The same with the smaller arch, with the A arch. Press it in the direction. Flip it over and press it again, just to make sure you get those folds pressed over so you don't have any gaps. Like this here, let me show you here. as I was pressing it, it kind of folded over over the seam rather than all the way against the seam. And that happens sometimes with those gentle curves. So instead of keeping it flat, I want to make sure it pulls to the actual seam line. So that's why we just make sure we do that on both sides. Okay. All right, now you have your A arches and B arches all ready, stitched and ready for turning to assemble into our melons. So when I see you next, that's what we will be up to. We'll be turning our arches, our pieced arches and the solid arches, and I'll also show you some improv arches as well. I'll see you soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.